Okay, I don't need to introduce these people, but I will, because there's nothing more that writers like is to have smoke blown up their asses. And there's nothing more than I like to do than blow it. So sit back and listen to me blow away. Now, Marieke Hardy, she's the lady one. Marieke Hardy's a writer, just so you don't get confused. Writer, blogger, author, columnist, producer, former child star, and one of the most luminous, hardworking, gifted, and generous people I have ever met. Lie! Look, she's written for heaps of telly shows. She wrote and created Last Man Standing, which I thought was very good, but they fucked up with the casting, and that was the problem. And is the co-creator, writer, and producer of the hilarious and award-winning series Laid on ABC TV. Do you love Laid? Give me a round of applause if you love it. Yeah. There we go. Many achievements that show has, but most impressive, which I think, was getting the line Potting the Brown onto ABC TV. Which is now used frequently on high rotation at my house by my young children. Marieke had an award-winning blog called Reasons You'll Hate Me, and she writes for many publications including The Age, Frankie, M Magazine, and is the star, not just eye candy, but brain candy, of ABC's First Tuesday book Club. Now, Marieke is the author of You'll Be Sorry When I'm Dead, which is published by Allen and Unwin, which we are very grateful that she published the book because it's magnificent.
Got a moustache on it.
But the thing that she has told me she is most proud of, and I'm not surprised, is her, she's the co-creator with Michaela Maguire of Women of Letters, which presents 5 brilliant writers in a, well, not just writers, but musicians, politicians, anybody who basically is on Twitter and can talk, in a lively homage to the lost art of letter writing. Live missives and rowdy panel discussion. Who's been to a Women of Letters? Isn't it fantastic? So not only is it a literary event that creates and celebrates a diverse range of strong female talent while simultaneously raising funds for the Australian Animal Rescue Shelter Edgar's Mission, it's now not an afternoon but also a book. Has anyone got the Women's of Letters compilation? It is just a cracking read. And that was published by Penguin. And I think that there's a second one coming out this year. I don't know. I've got mine ready to go. I haven't heard from them. So I can't wait. And I don't know whether you know this, but there is actually an ad for Apple. And they've got the picture of, you know, the bookshelf. The bookshelf in the iPad, and there it is, Women of Letters. I couldn't believe that. So once the monthly soiree the idea was originally bringing together 5 of Melbourne's best and brightest female writers, musicians, politicians, whatever. Now it's not just Melbourne, it's national. And now it's not just ladies, but men too. Which brings me to my next guest, who is a man of letters. Was that enough?
That was so long.
Really?
Yeah.
I think you had a couple of birthdays in there. No, but you deserve it. Look, I'm not just going to sit up here and go, there's Marieke, there's Benjamin, let's talk. This is Benjamin Law, ladies and gentlemen. Give Marieke a round of applause and welcome her to the stage.
Thank you.
And we'll give one to Benjamin at the end. Now, Benjamin Law, I've got to tell you about Benjamin Law. We share a publisher, and I heard about Benjamin Law before I knew about him, and I heard so much about what a great guy he was and a brilliant writer and so hilarious. I hated him before I'd even met him because that was all people could tell me, but he lives up to it. He's a Brisbane-based writer and author and a frequent contributor to dozens of publications, including, frankly, the monthly Q Weekend. He is also, more importantly, a beautiful, passionate and brilliant man we're very lucky to have. And when you have got writers who are so young and so prolific and so brilliant, you kind of go, wow, we've got you for like at least 50 years, so I cannot wait to hear what he says, does and writes next. Now, you will find Benjamin writing on everything from sex education in schools to vaccination. I mean, he really does get around. He is a subject slut, I think is fair to say.
And a slut in general.
Totally. And I was told by Mark Colvin that he wrote, and I looked it up because Mark Colvin told me it was brilliant, a cracking piece in the Australian Financial Review yesterday on why progressive Gen Ys are turning their back on the ALP. Who read it? Yep. If you haven't read it, don't walk, run. Run and read it. It's fantastic. His essays have been anthologised into the Best Australian Essays twice. His debut book, The Family Law, in 2010, was shortlisted for Book of the Year at the Australian Book Industry Awards and is currently being developed into a TV series. So basically, this is the Asian homosexual Seinfeld that we're sitting next to right now. Benjamin's second book, Gasia, which is about, gays in Asia, is going to be released on my birthday, 1st of September, by Black Ink Books. I'm wrapped.
I wrote it for her.
It is.
The biggest Asian lesbian I know.
And apart from Penny Wong, he is a sought-after speaker, and he appears on talk fests like Men of Letters, which is how there's Barbie and Ken. It's the Ken version of Women of Letters, Q&A, and famously at the National Conference of Family Relationship Services Australia, where Kevin Andrews' wife Margaret called him disgusting. Benjamin's recently. He's recently finished Below the Line, living on less than $2 a day to raise money to help alleviate poverty, and he raised over $1,400. Give my guests a round of applause.
Thank you.
And now, the first thing I asked these guys to do, who are not only huge admirers of each other's work, but to read their favourite bit from each other's book. I'm working on a memoir myself at the moment with Black Ink book called Tantrum with Reality. I've got a book coming out in November called The Happiness Show, which is a novel, which is fiction. It's a romantic comedy. And one of the reasons that I wanted to do this is when I reread over The Happiness Show, which is a novel, fiction, I realised it was far more truthful than my actual autobiography. So that was what my interest was. So I would like to open it up with Benjamin Law reading from Marieke Hardy's book, You'll Be Sorry When I'm Dead.
Okay, so we were asked to choose our most favourite parts, or perhaps the most disgusting parts of each other's book. Luckily for me, my favourite part of this book sort of coincides with some of the most disgusting parts. Marieke opens her book with a preamble about how she wanted to be certain things when she grew up, and one of which was a prostitute. I think we all, when we first discovered sex, probably wanted to be a prostitute.
No, it wasn't just sex, and this is so misleading. It was because I saw prostitutes in musicals, like Cabaret, and I thought what they did was wear bowler hats and walk around chairs going like this.
Which is what
they do.
And
that's why, at Sweet Charity, that's why I thought I wanted to do it. But this story has really taken on quite a horrible extension. A man came up to me last night and said, I heard about that. Your dad said you couldn't do musical theatre, so you became a prostitute. The Chinese whispers. It's horrible. So I actually just thought it was just fishnets and hot pants. I didn't realise there was work to be done.
So this is a morality tale for everyone who doesn't get into the musical theatre degree at Whopper. So we're going to start at a juncture where Marieka's actually grown up, and her fascination with prostitutes has extended to actually wanting to introduce one into her life.
This is like a horrible 21st.
You wrote this.
I know, but I never read that bit out. I read like really nice bits.
But hang on, you said that about me when I mentioned a part of the book. Oh God. It's like, we read it, it's a book, we're all reading it,
Oh, gosh.
It's terrible.
We can
There
discuss
should be like
this
a photo
shared horror
montage up the back or something.
of the prostitute, who I will introduce to you now. Our lady caller announced herself with all the delicacy and grace of Anna Nicole Smith on Oaks Day. Grouse Place, how long have you lived here? Her greeting echoed around the entrance hall. I looked around my room for somewhere to hide. I couldn't possibly face this. I'd written for Neighbours, for Christ's sake. I had a blog. I had gone to the same school as Peter Costello. Maddie replied, actually, I don't live here. My girlfriend does. Ah, where's she tonight? Her response was brief but honest. She's hiding in the bedroom. I wanted him to die in a freak accident, a painful one that involved fire and a pair of pinking shears. Why don't you get her then? Maddie entered the bedroom with apologetic shrugs. I hissed at him, mimed furiously that this was a bad idea and I had made a dreadful mistake, and if he could please ask her to leave and take an apricot cookie for her troubles on the way out, I would be forever grateful. Instead, I was dragged from my hiding place and shoved into view like the youngest child of the Von Trapp family singers facing a pre-dinner performance. I waved. I still can't believe I waved. Who waves at a prostitute? Hello there. She was roughly 25 years of age. She was roughly 5'4", and she was rough. not in an obscene way, more like if you saw her at the Brownlow on the arm of Craig Ling, you'd
Cameron
think...
Ling.
Cameron Ling.
Yeah.
You'd think, gosh, isn't it nice that Lingy's found someone to chat to? She had long red hair and a tight khaki supre skirt that she was beaming at us like we were children, and we just presented her with a paddle pop stick photo frame with the phrase "World's Topless Mum" painted on it. I really had no issue with her physically. She was kind of sweet if you had consumed 7 glasses of Pinot Gris and smudged your vision slightly, but I definitely wish she'd stop clasping her hands and saying, "Look at yous two, so cute," every 5 minutes. In hindsight, she was probably nervous and attempting to break the ice, but at the time I thought she was about 30 seconds away from spitting on a hanky and wiping dirt off my face with it. I kept stealing helpless glances at Matty, who seemed happily ensconced in his role as host and instantly began leading our guest on a tour of the kitchen. Surely this was the moment a vaguely amusing idea became too real, and everyone made polite noises about needing to go home and pay the sitter. It hardly seemed the time to leap into a life experience in which I was no longer certain I wanted to partake. I'm not even sure what I wanted out of this whole deal anymore, outside of the rather ribald story to terrify my cousins with around the Christmas Day table, and a satisfied long-held curiosity about what a real-life prostitute would look like when not being depicted by the cast of Foxtel's successful Australian drama series Satisfaction. And now here I was, watching helplessly as a ginger floozy with small patches of eczema on her elbows admired my toaster. This had all gone terribly, terribly wrong.
Oh, I'm glad that's over. Thanks, Ben. Oh, now it's my turn.
Yes,
isn't it?
now Marieke Hardy is going to read from Benjamin
Ben's
Law's
book.
book called The Family Law.
Yes, I'm a bit tired. I have to apologise in advance that I was on this stage last night reading from my teenage diary, which was probably equally as humiliating as this moment. And I'm not very used to, you know, you write a book and then you have to give readings, and I'm not used to readings. And the first time I ever did one, I was in a hotel and I was quite dressed up, and I walked into the lift, and a lady was in there, and she said, "You look nice." And I thought, this is a chance to show off. I said, "Yes, I'm on my way to do a reading." And she said, "Oh, a tarot reading?" And that put me in my place. No. So this is my tarot reading of Ben's book. I love Ben's book. I mean, it's a collection of stories about family, and I guess maybe we can talk later about the responsibilities that you have when you write about your family, and, you know, they never necessarily choose to be depicted in your books the way that you depict them. But I like this story because it's about Ben getting sex education at school and, causing trouble. As a class, we were accustomed to Mrs. Reid reading from us from giant storybooks the size of a desk, but we never thought there'd be sex education versions featuring massive three-dimensional pop-out reproductive organs. Monstrously large-scaled labia opened and folded at us as Mrs. Reid turned the pages, like fleshy, winking vertical eyes. "Wink, wink," the pop-up labia seemed to be saying to us. "Nudge, nudge." When Mrs. Reid turned the next page, a massive ball sack stared us in the face, silencing us. "This," Mrs. Reid said solemnly, "is a scrotum." With her finger, she proceeded to outline the wrinkly sack of skin which hung out of the book sadly. We got the sense Mrs. Reid didn't much care for the scrotum. She gave it a wary look, as if to say, "So we meet again, scrotum, my old nemesis." "And this," she said, unimpressed and turning the page, "is a man's erect penis." The giant cardboard penis popped out, fully aroused, pointing at us like a giant accusing finger. Involuntarily, we rocked back. As she showed us the different parts, the vas deferens, the urethra, the glands, her finger slowly traced the cardboard shaft of the thing, up and down. Outside, it began to rain. "When an adult male is aroused," Mrs. Reid said, "the body pumps lots of blood into it, so it becomes stiff. Sort of like," she trailed off. "Like a ruler," someone said. "Like a bone? Like a sausage after it's been in the freezer?" "No," Mrs. Reid said, "it's more like a rock, like a brick except shaped like a sausage." The bell for lunchtime rang. "Well, look at that," Mrs. Reid said, snapping the cardboard penis shut, making it retreat immediately. "Time to eat. While the other kids filed out for lunch, several of us chose to stay inside to avoid the downpour. When we were sure no teachers were around, we opened the pop-up book and started to giggle. We made the labia wink again, then turned it sideways to make it talk like a massive cardboard mouth. Hello, we made it say. My name is Mrs. Labia and my appetite is ginormous. I love eating everything, especially doodles. Pleased to eat you. After we'd endowed that's the first time I've ever been a labia on stage, so I hope you all enjoyed that performance. After we'd endowed every pop-up representation of genitalia with a name and personality, Little Miss Ovaries, Annie the Anus, Clarence the smooth-talking clitoris, the impersonations of Mrs. Reed began. Scrotum, I screamed, straightening my spine, putting on a harsh British accent and pointing to the 3D ball sack with a sharp metal ruler. My impersonation of Mrs. Reed was uncanny and everyone knew it. Testicle, I said, turning the page. This, I said in Mrs. Reed's voice, is a vagina. Show me your vagina, girls. Everyone laughed at my comic genius. Then a girl named Courtney interrupted. Ben, no, she said. Look. Everyone gasped and saw the same thing. I'd been tearing the book to shreds with the square edge of the metal ruler. Appalled, I stopped breathing, my mouth hanging open. I turned to my friends only to find they'd run from the classroom, escaping the scene. When we reconvened in the afternoon, Mrs. Reed's face was red hot with rage. She made us sit on the floor again and perched the book on her lap, flicking through each page, slowly and accusingly. Looking at them was sickening. The pop-out genitals hung out of the book defeated, all pockmarked and savaged. Organs, tendons and nerves flopped out at wrong angles, like the wires of a telephone thrown against a wall. The kids who'd gone outside at lunchtime stared at the book open-mouthed. The rest of us looked to the floor. When I came back to return the book to the library, she hissed, what did I find? Holes.
Thank you.
What a treat. Now, we were talking about this before. How do you feel about the word memoir? Do you think of your books as memoirs, Marieke?
No, not at all. And I love being at writers' festivals because it's great and you meet writers, but I guess they don't usually have a lot of panels for humorous autobiographical essays. So I get put on lots of memoir panels. I was on one the other day with these two amazing American writers, and this guy, Joshua, survived bone marrow cancer and he nearly died during a bone marrow transplant. He was introduced. On the other side, Lemon Anderson, this incredible hip-hop poet. Both his parents were heroin addicts who died of AIDS. In the middle, funny swingers party. I'm the fatuous idiot on this panel.
And Marieke's been in the Henderson Kids.
So, no, I don't see it as a memoir. I guess it's easy for people to market it as such, but to me it's just a collection of funny stories that are personal.
What's your take on the word memoir?
I do like it, but for slightly different reasons, because when people say it's an autobiography, I think it implies that you have some sense of authority over what you've written, that there's some definitive account of your life out there that's actually factually correct. Memoir, for me, if I could write this book over and over and over again, and everyone would have a different take on it in my family. So I come from a family of 5 kids, 2 adults, and there's so much incident in my book, because there's so much incident in my life, that everyone has a completely different take on what happened. What I did before my book got published was I sent a manuscript, like a printout, these ginormous things that I'd spewed out of Officeworks to all of my family members, because I wanted to make sure they were okay with it. And they all came back, and everyone remembered something slightly differently. And the reaction I worried most about was my father, actually, because I wasn't sure if I'd portrayed him fairly. I'm writing about stuff that happened before I was even born. I wanted to know what he thought about it. And his take on it was that he didn't actually really mind in the end whatever I wrote, partly because he didn't have time to read it in the end. He's a hard worker. And, but he didn't mind, because he said, look, whoever reads your book will know that this is your take on it, and if they're intelligent enough, they'll know that your mum has a different take on it, and your brother and your sisters have as well. So I think memoir for me implies that it's that personal perspective where you are allowed to sort of mess things up a little, and are allowed to as well, as opposed to autobiography.
So you think of the word as autobiography as more factual, and this as a bit more. Do you have license to embroider your own life?
Yeah. It's funny, you know, a lot of people read my book and they're like, does your mother literally come up to people and talk about her vagina in such a frank way to complete strangers?
Yes,
and I have
she
to
does.
say,
Yes.
she does.
Great.
Marieke's probably experienced
Yes,
that.
I have.
She'll especially go up to people who are pregnant, women who are pregnant, and start going in graphic detail about what will happen to their vagina when they give birth, because she's given birth to 5 children, and she sort of goes up to other women, especially if they've had children, and she likes comparing stories, like they've been through the war or something, which in a way you sort of have. And that sort of throws people off. But I wrote about that in my book, and hardly anyone can possibly believe that my mum would talk, well, 1, would talk about her private parts in such a way, and 2, would be happy for it to go in a book. And I'm like, you really need to meet my mother, you know?
Yeah.
So a lot of people are sometimes staggered that the stuff I know is very, very accurate and doesn't need me to embellish anything, can possibly be true. And that's the thing about memoir. The stuff that seems unbelievable is often stuff that's just happened to us. I think everyone's got those stories.
I sense you're a bit uncomfortable with the term memoir. Or are you uncomfortable with the term memoir with your book?
Yeah, no,
Because
yeah,
I
no,
see
more
that
with
your
my
books
book.
are so similar. Like you think, yes, it's a memoir. You go, this is a collection of kind of funny essays.
To me, I guess memoir has a narrative structure, and there's no through line to my book. I mean, I presented the stories to my publisher, and they attempted to put it in a kind of order. So because I just wrote the stories as these sort of self-contained stories, and they came back and said, well, you've got to explain who this person is, because later on they're your boyfriend, and then you're broken up in the second story, and so they wanted there to be a bit more continuity about when people were introduced or what age I was. But there's no, this story starts when I'm 5 and by the end of the book, you know, I'm 35 or anything like that. So I guess to me that takes it out of the category of memoir, because it doesn't go, I was born in a blah blah. And
well, then would you write a memoir?
Not now.
No, right, okay, so this is near enough as damn it.
Oh, I don't know where. Well, I wouldn't do it yet. I don't. You know, you want to do something a bit different.
Well, that's interesting, because you wouldn't do it yet. Somebody was saying, I was out for dinner last night, and they said, oh, what do you... And I said, I've got this book coming out, and I'm working on these 2 other books, a memoir. And they go, you're too young to write a memoir. Well, I said, it's like a memoir / manifesto. I mean, to me, it's just a book. A book is just a book. You know, it's just words. And, I mean, I don't know what fiction is and non-fiction or whatever. And said, aren't you too young to write a memoir? Now, you are 28 now. Your book came out in 2010. You were 26 then.
Yeah.
And so there was a certain amount of bravery, or I'm not sure what the word is, to go, first book, memoir. You don't know who I am, and I'm going to talk about myself.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, I'm 29 now because I'm getting super old. You're right, because when I was writing my book, I was writing it at the same time as Michaela Maguire. Michaela Maguire, who does Women of Letters with Marieke. And Michaela's written this extraordinarily funny, sharp book about all the shithouse jobs she's had in her life, you know, working at video stores, working at casinos, working for a certain member of the Liberal Party who has amazing... Actually, I don't know if certain details made it into the book, because there was a lot of lawyering involved, so I won't talk about that chapter. But Michaela and I would often write to each other, because we're roughly the same age, I'm a bit older than her, and say, who the fuck commissioned someone so young to write a memoir? Because we felt like we were almost running out of material. But of course, you're just experiencing the anxiety that all writers have, that they might not have enough to write about, because certainly a lot of stories that I wrote ended up in the trash. But then again, I actually think most people out there of most ages could write a memoir. And I think it's not so much about, have you lived through famine, have you lived through war, does your mother talk about a vagina like this? It's more about, do you have an angle on what's happened? Do you actually have an interesting take on what you actually think happened? So a lot of my book is about my parents splitting up. And
there's some very, very sad parts of your book.
Yeah.
Really sad, when your mum was having a kind of sleeping sickness. And, you know, and I just, you know, it is such a ride. If you haven't read Marieke and Benjamin's book, please read them. I really am not a massive reader. I'm dyslexic, and it's really hard for me to read. I'm kind of functionally illiterate, and I read both of these books in like less than 2 days. I couldn't put them down. They're just like a great afternoon spent having an amazing conversation or listening to incredible story about life and, you know, beautiful language being used, and such a great ride. They both contain so much light and shade, you know, and I think responsibility, you talked about like the responsibility that you have. I want to ask you guys about the responsibility that you have to the people you are writing about, and also the responsibility that you have to the truth.
Well, your book is interesting because you actually get people to write back.
Yeah, that was a good idea. In about 6 of the stories, I said to the people who are in the stories, look, I'm writing this book, there's a story that you're in, but before I publish it, I'll give you the story and I want you to write whatever you want to as a response, whether you say it didn't happen like that, or it's wrong, or I see it this way. And thankfully, almost all of them were, you know, quite positive, and I think it's been strange for people now that the book's out. At first, there were a couple of people like, I'm going to be in a book, and afterwards like, I don't want to be in the book. Too late. That wasn't really about covering my ass saying, well, if I get them to write. There was nothing cynical about that exercise. I didn't say, well, if they have to write in there, then they're clearly okay with what I write about them. I wanted to give those people a voice because Ben and I are both huge fans of David Sedaris, as I'm sure a lot of people here are. I grew up reading his books. I wrote him a fan letter when I was about 19, and he wrote back on his typewriter before he started using a computer. And I always read his books and think, you know, what does your father think about you talking about him carrying around all that rotting food, and what does your partner feel about this, and surely you've embellished this. And I know he speaks about when, you know, certain family events, now out comes the Notebook and everyone's like, this isn't for a book, fuck off. But I was interested in those people because he creates them as characters. They become characters in his book. It's not just about David, it's about the people in his life. And I wanted to hear their voice. So that really motivated me to go, well, hopefully people are interested in these people that I paint, and they're real people. And while it's always going to be from my perspective because I'm the one with the pen, how interesting to hear them say in a different voice, I don't see it that way, or I see you as this way, or I remember it as this. So, I mean, I really liked that aspect. I thought about doing it for every story, but then I thought I'd just paint myself in a corner trying to find an angle. So just the ones that felt natural for the people to write back. And my father writes the foreword to my book saying, you know, I love your writing, but why can't you fictionalise? You know, like he says, you can tell the same stories, just call it Derek Nardi or something like that, you know. I mean, my grandfather, my father's father, is Frank Hardy, who obviously wrote a lot about himself and the family as well. So my father's sort of been bookended, the poor bastard, by these. He appears in The Hard Way, which is the book about the power that glory trial, as this kid in, you know, short pants. So, and he dealt with Frank sort of mildly fictionalising something and getting sued for it. So he wishes that I could use the same emotional story, but just fictionalise it slightly.
Okay, so that's what he wishes. So why do you go against his wishes?
Well, because he's not my real dad. No, he is my real dad.
No, you should see him.
Yeah. I look like what would happen if my parents had a child. I'm just half of each.
Yeah.
Well, because I like stories that tell the truth. And I mean, I use people's real names. I had one person in my book, I showed him the story and he said, I don't want to write a response, and can you pull me back out of that story a bit? And I did it, because you don't want to publish and be damned necessarily. You don't want to lose friendships and family over it. But that said, I mean, yeah, my father requested that I do it, and I didn't do it, and they understood. And I don't think it was about them protecting themselves. They wanted me to protect myself. They're very robust. They're used to me writing about them a lot in columns and using them as figures of fun. But they, are protective of me, and they sometimes want me to not be so open and vulnerable, I suppose. But it's always more interesting to me when the truth is on the page.
So when you write, and I want you to answer this question too next, Benjamin, but when you write, do you just write, do you edit, if you know you're going to show the people that you're writing about, do you edit at all?
No.
Or do you just write out big? You just go, this is how it comes, and I'll pull back after I've spoken to them.
Yeah,
okay.
You can't put the boundaries in place before you set it on the page, because you.
And
just
do you
don't
say,
know
look,
yourself.
I've written out big here? I mean,
No, you can't preempt
You just say
it.
read. Is that what you do?
Yeah, and I guess I expected, some people might have written back and said, I expected to be printing some angry emails or letters that, I just wanted them to have a voice in it, but everyone was quite supportive. But you just say, here's the story. Whatever you want to write as a response will go in word for word. And that's how it was too.
So, Benjamin, your responsibility to the people that you're writing about and your responsibility to the truth.
Well, see, I actually like my family, ultimately. Marieke brought up David Sedaris before, and I really love his work so much, and in part it was one of the reasons why I ended up writing the book. And I had this opportunity to interview David on the phone for about an hour. It was supposed to be much shorter, but I'd just been asked to write this book, and I was feeling a bit nervous about it. And so I asked him, what are his rules? How does he actually honour relationships, but also honour the truth as well, and still be funny as well in all of that? And he laid down his ground rules for himself. So one of the rules was, if you're going to write about someone in a bad way, make sure they're someone who doesn't read much. There are other rules as well, like more serious ones. For instance, he doesn't write about stories that would betray someone's trust. So, for instance, one of his sisters, because like me, he comes from a huge family with a lot of sisters. One of his sisters had told him this great story about her parent-in-laws, and it just made them look like bozos, like complete idiots. And he just thought it was sublime. These people, there was this huge build-up, and then there's this punchline, and they come out as buffoons. And he really, really wanted to write the story. But of course, no one knew that story except his sister. And if he wrote it, everyone would know that it was his sister that told him. So he didn't end up writing that story, but he reads it out every time he does a book tour, except in the city in which these people reside. And so that was good, that chat, because it made me sort of sit down and think, well, what are my ground rules for writing this book? And I was actually quite a bit conscious about it, rather than just laying it down on the page. But the reason I didn't feel too trapped is a few things. One, I was already writing for Frankie magazine a lot, and they let me and Marieke write pretty short personal essays around a theme, like 650 words. So already I'd been testing the waters in terms of what I felt I could get away with, what they felt comfortable with, and what lines I really shouldn't cross, or what I didn't feel comfortable with the public knowing. And the second thing is, all families have really different lines. I mean, when I talked about my mum before, talking about what happens to a woman during childbirth, that's not a line for our family. We're always talking about bodily function. It's probably a Chinese thing. And we're always, talking about poo. I'm sorry, Marieke, I know she can't do poo. We're always talking... she can poo. She can't talk about it.
I don't like talking about it.
But
Thanks,
she can
Ben.
poo.
And she can put a line about potting the brown in Blade.
Exactly. So we have very different lines in terms of bodily function, but there are some things that I wouldn't feel comfortable talking about. Like, our family doesn't talk about money very much, for instance.
Right.
So I wouldn't talk about money too much in the book, and I wouldn't feel a reason to. And I also came up with sort of prerequisites in terms of what I wanted the stories to be, because really all of us could write a Wikipedia entry on our lives. This is when I was born, and then this is what happened, and blah. But that's not a book. So for me, I wanted to frame the book around certain themes. They had to touch themes, and they had to be funny as well, to some extent.
So you knew that all before you wrote it?
No, but I mean...
Because you're talking about ground rules and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I mean, ground rules are set before you actually get cracking. Like,
sure.
I've got 87,000 words in my supposed memoir. Like, they're not sentences, they're just words.
Yeah.
I don't even know what the book is yet. But it sounds like you really, from beforehand, had some hard and fasts.
Well, I'm a nerd, for starters. I mean, when I say all these ground rules, I don't think they were articulated and cemented in my brain as such, like, don't do this and do this. But I was instinctively feeling that there were some things I couldn't touch, and some things that I really, really wanted to touch on, because they were funny and hilarious. But then other stuff maybe was too painful or too weird, or just didn't actually make for an interesting, readable story.
Is there stuff in that you... is a bit raw and that you wish that you had been able to include? That you haven't, for reasons of not wanting to upset, offend, insult, or, enrage?
No, I don't think so. There are some things that incrementally I'm going to be braver and braver about writing about. The difficult process for me with this book was not relying on jokes every second line.
Yeah.
And Judith Lucy, who put out her great Lucy
Her
Family
book
Alphabet.
isn't it fantastic? The Lucy Family Alphabet, 3 books, 1 week. It's fantastic.
But she, Ben Ball, who is her publisher at Penguin, who actually had a look at one of my stories and gave me some advice, and he gave us both the same advice, which is like, you don't have to tell all those jokes. You don't have to rely on the jokes. Let some of the emotional truth come out, and don't be afraid of it. And I think Judith's came from doing stand-up. Mine came from writing a television column in The Age, which was ostensibly an amusing column, short. Everyone had their coffee, ha ha ha. And you just get scared that without the jokes, you're nothing, or people expect you to be funny. And so I found it difficult to be more emotionally truthful, especially if you are a humorist. You just want to present as always funny, you know. So it's difficult and scary to put yourself out there. And I don't know if I could have gone further in that book, but certainly it gave me the scope to continue onwards and be braver about sharing more in the future.
You know what I find really interesting about this book? A lot of the stuff that happens in here is really quite recent, you know. It hasn't taken place too far in the past. And I think I'm a less brave writer in that respect, in that everything that happens in this book mostly happened probably about a decade before, so around the time of my family breaking up. Because if I'd written that book around the time it was happening, it would have been a hideous, unreadable book. It would have been like, this is what my parents are doing, and I can only express my feelings through playing a clarinet or something, you know, awful, awful, awful. But it's only, I mean, who said that the equation is time plus tragedy equals comedy, right?
Yeah.
And I felt that after 10 or so years, you know, the whole protracted 5-year breakup of my parents. There were some instances I could actually laugh about. You know, the times where my dad took us out on weekends because he had custody of us, and he didn't know what to do with the kids, so he had to take us to all these really horrible theme parks. Like, if you go to the Sunshine Coast, one of the things you can do is, like, get high and go to terrible theme parks like Super Bee and the hedge maze and the big pineapple. Like, it's a big pineapple. There's not much to do there. And so we'd go on these trips, and they were really appalling. And what was even more appalling was my mum insisted on coming as well. And there was just so much tension on Dad's weekend with Mum on the side. It was so weird. And, you know, it was some of the most miserable years of my life. But when I looked at the details, like all the theme parks we went to, I could sort of deal with it and sort of laugh at it.
It's funny, you know, talking to both of them about their books. They're both such show bags of fantastic kind of stories and emotions. And you retelling me that, and I haven't thought about it since I read the book. I remember just like squirming, just going, "Oh, make it stop, make it stop!" But you just had to kind of keep reading. And there's parts in your book like that too. It's just like, "Oh no!" And Judith is the same. You know, you go, "She's not going to go there. She's not going to go." Oh no, she's gone there. And is that why people are drawn to reading memoirs, kind of looking through people's laundry? And is it like, why are people interested in reading other people's life stories, the good and the bad, the clean and the dirty?
Well, for me, it's about a sense of connectivity. And I still feel that there's so much of my life that's private. A lot of people have said, I can't believe you put that in that book. And, you know, referring to Siddharth again, he calls it the illusion of intimacy. So people say, well, I would never share that story. And you say, well, I just think they're funny stories. They're things that I feel comfortable telling. So I don't know. I get scared of putting too much of myself on the page sometimes. I don't know. Sorry, I just got Jeffrey Eugenides pinched my bum last night in his room, and I just got distracted thinking about it, and I lost my train of thought. So can you repeat the question? And I stopped thinking about Jeffrey Eugenides pinching my bum.
What's the question?
Oh no, you've forgotten the question.
I know, because I just went there.
Why are we reading them?
Okay, sorry,
about
I've
dirty,
forgotten that. I didn't mean to say that about Jeffrey Eugenides. The sense of connectivity, because I love Robert Crumb and his wife Aileen Crumb, who are people who cannot help but put themselves on the page. And I don't know if you remember, Robert Crumb was supposed to come here last year for the Opera House, and there was this, Sunday papers trying to fill something, and they just, dialed up outrage, and he couldn't come. And, you know, he always gets accused of, how could you say those revolting things about women and sex? And he said, I don't know. I know it's horrible, but it's in my head. And I think that's so brave of him to put the horrible things in his head on the page, because we all have those horrible things in different ways. I don't feel about sex or women the same way Robert Crumb does, but I have my own kind of sick, repulsive, insecure, horrible thoughts. And I think it's so braver and generous of people to share that, because then you're not feeling so alone thinking, I once did this terrible thing, I behaved terribly, I think terrible thoughts. And I mean, I love that he does that, because he feels horrible about it. He has all these women's groups sort of protesting his shows, and he's like, I know, it's horrible in my head. It's terrible, but I have to share it. And so that's why I read their things, because I don't want to feel like a sick bastard.
But the illusion of intimacy is really interesting, and like particularly with, only because I know you better, Marieke, and I've heard you kind of mention this before. People think that they know you really well because you will talk about sex or drinking or swingers parties or prostitutes or, you know, taking a photograph of yourself and looking and saying,
don't tell that again.
Yeah, I look like my dad. No, but people think, well, there's nothing else to know because that's far bigger than my actual life is, and they can't possibly conceive that that's like 5% of you.
Easy, funny. I think they're funny, awkward stories to tell, and it's me being awkward in those situations. I think they're funny. I think my intentions are always good. I put myself in those scenarios because I wanted to learn about the world and see things, and, you know, there's nothing salacious about it. I wasn't trying to be a show pony going, check out these sexy things I did, because I come across as this complete oaf in these and, you know, really inept. And so I think it's kinder to share those elements, but they're the easy ones to tell. You kind of stumbling over or knocking over something at a swingers party, the crudités. There were crudités, it was horrible. So when you do that, that's a funny story, but, you know, maybe your relationship with your mother is a more difficult story to tell.
Yeah, it is, but I mean, they seem to be the ones that people are drawn to. This morning when I was thinking about, when I was writing the intros and thinking about this today, something kept coming back into my head. It's a saying by Barry Humphries, which is, failure is not a test of friendship. Success is. And when you're writing about, there's a lot of, you're both very self-deprecating in the way that you write. And I tend to think that people are not as interested in reading about all of the, I'm terribly in love and this is all really happy and I've got heaps of money and I feel at peace now, unless there's a struggle beforehand. Do you feel people are more interested in a kind of a slightly schadenfreude thing? This is, and I thought about a conversation I had with your dad about the book, and he said that someone had written and slagged you off about the stuff about the bubble and saying it was really, I don't know whether you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, they read all my bad press.
And they're saying, and no, but someone was saying, oh, it was really juvenile and narcissistic or something along those lines. No, but then somebody else who you respected had said, no, that was like Fitzgerald could have written that. Scott Fitzgerald. And
very similar.
So, but that was what that was like the two takes on this like amazing, beautiful, incredible, trippy time that you had with this bunch of creative people. You were all in the same space. You were kind of between, you know, youth and being a grown-up. You probably still are, but you were all there at that same train station at the same time having this really incredible wild time. And I was so surprised that someone would kind of would be so down on...
Well, you know, it's hard for it's interesting that my dad talked to you. It's hard for my parents that, you know, I get described as divisive, you know, like love her or you hate her. And I just think, well, I don't know, I'm really nice. Like, I don't understand why people get so, you know, I can understand that I'm a bit of a tit on the book show or something and I don't like her clothes or whatever, but people get really violently angry, and I get...
I've never experienced that.
No. I've got the hide of a rhino, so it kind of washes off, but it's harder for my parents. They find that quite difficult, you know, and that's where the protective element comes in again, is that they want to protect me from that.
But yes, it's interesting that it's hard, you say it's harder for them, but they're so incredibly involved with everything you do, with your writing and Women of Letters. You know, anytime you appear, they're there and they're talking.
Only child.
And they know the first. No, but not all parents are like that or families are like that. My family doesn't ask me anything, make any reference to it at all. So that's the way that they deal with it. People, you know, families deal with it in different ways. How has writing the book changed your relationship with your parents and your siblings?
I'm not sure if it's changed too much. I mean, certainly my mum loves the fact that she's notorious now. So sometimes I feel like there's this character of my mum in the book, and it is my mum, but a very distilled version of her.
That's why we need a TV series. I mean, as soon as I heard
She has to
that
play herself
the
too.
family law is going to be turned into a television series, I thought, I cannot wait to see your mum in that.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting casting. We were thinking maybe Chris Lilly. We're still weighing things up. It's funny you bring up the TV show because we've just come out of this 72-hour lockdown where we've been workshopping it. The crew behind the Slap, Matchbox Pictures, they own the rights, so we're working with Tony Ayres, and my sister's one of the screenwriters who's working on it as well.
Is that Michelle?
Yeah, Michelle. So she's a writer too. So we've actually been throwing up all this stuff in the book, but also stuff that doesn't happen in the book. And in the back of my mind, I am thinking, is this fit for televisual consumption? And there is this thing where, a book, there's this self-contained thing, and, I don't think my dad really minded that certain parts of the book were out there because it was in a book and he's not a huge reader, so it's this completely different world for him. But when we started talking about the TV show amongst my family, I think everyone, including myself, started feeling these new emotions. Like, what would this mean to have any of these stories on air? So, and it's different. Like, even though I'd sent my family, a manuscript and asked them, look, how do you feel about this? And they said they're okay. Once it's actually out in book form, people start feeling different things and not just the author.
Well, the story and the truth and the relationship changes when, it's one thing thinking it, it's another thing writing it alone, another thing publishing it and the editor's reading it, and then when it's out in the open, it's not yours anymore. It has its life of its own. Now, we have 10 minutes left. I'd love to open to some questions.
Germaine Greer was very disparaging about Jeanette Widdowson in her, what's the latest book called?
On I'm thinking Oranges Are Theirs. Come on, everyone's read Jeanette Winterson's book. No, the new one.
You don't have to be.
Why be happy
to be
yeah.
normal.
She felt that real names shouldn't have been used, and Mother might feel pretty upset about that. And she thought it was illegitimate to write this sort of family memoir using real names. You weren't so critical, but what do you think about that?
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting point. Did everyone hear the question as well? That about Germaine Greer came on the book show and, well, I don't know if pulverise is the word. I'd say she's still picking parts of Jeanette Winterson's book out of her teeth with a toothpick now. She absolutely destroyed it. And she was saying it was unfair of Jeanette to portray her adoptive mother in that sense. I mean, who's dead now, but the woman is now forever going to be remembered as this hideous beast, and this is the power you have with the pen. I do use real names because to me it's braver, but these people are all still alive and I have to be held accountable. I spoke to Kate Holden a lot about this process as well. She wrote that great memoir, In My Skin, and she feels a lot of guilt about it because you are the person with the pen. Once it's down in your book, those people, that's the way they're portrayed forever. That's how they were at that time, how you describe them, that's how everyone sees them. And my best friend, in my book, there's a couple of moments where she says, I wasn't very well when that was happening, and I know it sort of was a very hedonistic and colourful time, but I was torn between two partners, and now that's forever. That's how people are going to see me in that book, and that is a great responsibility. I thought, and Germaine Greer was also saying, she doesn't care when people write about her. They offer to show it to her, and she says, no, fuck it, publish, and then never speaks to them again. But look, I mean, it's an interesting point of view because, yes, there is a lot of guilt and responsibility when you paint someone in that way, and Jeanette Winterson has really chosen to portray her adoptive mother in a very, very poor light. But I mean, it's the writer's privilege. It's
interesting.
A
who owns the story? If that's your experience of that person, what do you reckon?
It's funny because you might be able to say, look, my motivation wasn't to write you like that. Like I was thinking Augustin Burroughs, who wrote Running with Scissors, blah, 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 blah. I had to do an in conversation with him once, and he just released this book about his father and his late father. He wrote it after he'd died, and his father is basically a psychopath in the book.
Oh, yeah.
And the father's wife, so his stepmother, Augustin's stepmother, Augustine knew that she was going to be super, super angry about the portrayal of his father as a psychopath. And the book came out, she got a copy, he braced himself for the phone call, it came, and she said, I am so, so furious at you because you've got this one detail about his clothes wrong or something. And that was it. So sometimes you expect like fury and outrage over how someone's presented, but then they have the complete opposite reaction. And certainly I had that when I write about my senior school drama teacher, who's called Mr. Mallory in the book. And I described him like, I loved this guy. Like, we lived in awe and fear of him. He was gloriously fat man who had a beard and spoke like this, and he'd throw his shoes at us when we were doing a bad job on the stage. And he'd say things like, if he overheard, these two children speaking about him, like teasing him about his weight, and then he sort of just hovered over them until they could just feel this presence behind them. And he said, do you know what would happen, child, if I sat on you? And they said, no, Mr. Mallory. And he said, you would die. And so that goes in the book, because I think that is so phenomenal, and I think that's incredible. And I really, really loved my drama teacher, but words come back to me that he's really, really quite upset with his inclusion in the book and how he's being portrayed. So that you know, even though I could plead that my motivation was out of love, it doesn't matter if the person buys it or not. You have to, I mean, as much as we have control over how they're represented, there's another thing as well, in that we have no control over how other people might react too.
I had an ex-partner who's in the book, who I knew I was writing stuff. He got quite sensitive about the story, but when we broke up, he wrote a record about it. And I was saying, well, perhaps I didn't want to be standing in rooms listening or knowing that people knew these songs were about me. It's the same story, but this is my perspective, and I have the right to tell it this way. So he felt uncomfortable. Neither of us owned the stories, but we told them in different ways.
Another question?
Hello. On the topic of what restricts you from telling the truth, we've looked a lot at the emotional side of things, but to the three panellists, I was going to ask about the legal side of things, because Catherine, I imagine that this is an issue you've had to deal with from time to time.
Less than you'd expect. It's kind of interesting. My take is that, no one has the right not to be offended. Offence is a healthy byproduct of free speech. And more damage is done by taking offence than giving offence. I mean, at the moment in Australia, our defamation laws are miles and miles behind. And legally, I just say what I like. But my recent stoush with Cardinal George Pell, he tried to, a couple of weeks ago, threatened to sue me and Twitter. And I wrote a little piece, a column on my website. I took down the offending meme, which was a picture of his face just saying we were preparing young English boys. And I took that down and wrote a kind of a mock apology in an attempt to shame him and humiliate him. I mean, I think with the democratisation of information that there are many different ways that you can say things without saying things. And if you read Morty Bromberg's take on he was the judge in the Andrew Bolt case. He was there for, it was racial vilification, but what the group really wanted to do was take him down for defamation, but you can't do a class action, and it was too expensive to do that. So instead they took him down for racial vilification. He talks in his judgment, it's a fantastic piece where he talks about the way that he manipulated his words, so he wasn't really saying them, but he's citing other people to say them a little later in the blog. So it's a very murky area, and it's getting a bit murkier, and I'm sure that Marieke and I will both find ourselves back there fairly soon. Do either of you guys want to comment on that one?
Oh, no, I mean, just, in terms of the people in my book writing this response, my publisher was like, hell yeah, green light. They've got their names in it, they've read it, but she thought that was very good. But you just hope that you've got a publishing house you do have a publishing house, they legal it before it goes out. I mean, they want to cover themselves as much as you.
Look, the things that I've supposedly got into trouble for, that have been kind of defamatory or possibly a bit, upsetting or offensive, I mean, I've got to say, my first compilations of columns with black ink books was called "It's Not My Fault They Print Them," and that actually came from I am certain I have published more defamatory and inflammatory things in the Age newspaper than anything I've done on Twitter or said as part of stand-up or on stage or whatever. I remember coming up with that title after writing an article and calling Sam Newman vain, a narcissist, a bully, a misogynist, and that went to print. And I remember somebody saying, he could sue you for that. And I really got a bit panicked. But I'm thinking, hang on, it's not my fault they print them. I wrote it. Doesn't the legal responsibility lie with them? So,
over there, I think.
There's a question over here.
Yes. Can you reflect about you growing up to become a writer, or was there any moment in the book when you said something funny happened and said, oh yeah, this is what I'm going to write about?
Well, I grew up in a writing family. Like I mentioned, my grandfather was an author, and it wasn't necessarily that I considered writing as a career because I had a very ill-advised period as a child actor before I turned to writing. That was a good idea. So I've really my entire awkward prepubescence is sort of captured on film with like buck teeth. It's horrible. But I never associated writing with a career, which is very strange because I had so many writers in the family, but everyone was readers. You know, when you're surrounded by words, I think it does make it a little easier to take that path. And I guess I started screenwriting, but for me it was blogging that really brought out, that's where I found my real voice, because I wasn't trying to write television for somebody else. I wasn't trying to write a column about television. I was just writing, you know, my opinions, my thoughts, and that sort of paves when you are writing about yourself and your family. In terms of knowing that you're going to write about those experiences when you're having them, I'm not sure if you're in the middle of this horrible breakup going, this is going to be awesome. You know? But certainly when something quite shit happens, once you've sort of stopped doing that for a bit, you know, now people say you can write about that. And there is a huge part of a healing process, I think, in writing. So for me, it was a general, to become a writer, it was a general path. But yeah, bit of a vague answer.
For me, I didn't want to be a writer as a kid, although I read a lot of books. So I was always, you know, big family. My mum would have to like throw books in the corner and I'd chase it like a dog. So very low maintenance child. If there were books, I was happy. But then as a teenager, I started reading so many magazines. And at that stage, I still didn't want to be a writer. I wanted to be a child actor. I wanted, you know, this is like this scrawny Asian kid with like acne and orthodontic braces, thinking that it'd be really awesome to go on Home and Away or something. But I loved reading music magazines, and I wrote a letter to the editor of Rolling Stone about a story that they'd run, and then they chose it as Letter of the Week.
Woohoo!
And they sent me a stereo, and I thought, wow, like writing's awesome. So there's the incentive.
And that might be a lovely out. I would like you to give Benjamin and Marieke a round of applause. And please come and see them in the bookshop. They will sign your books. You can come and say hello to me too. Marieke Hardy, Benjamin Law, aren't we lucky? I hope you're enjoying the festival. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine.